Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the US election has already involved some of the biggest names in American politics, with 2 new charges being brought just today. But now a British financier has found himself thrust into the heart of it all. Bill Browder, who we will be speaking to in a moment, is a hedge fund manager who took advantage of the mass privatization following the fall of the Soviet Empire to become one of the largest foreign portfolio investors in the country, amassing a personal fortune. But then he fell out of favor with the authorities. In 2005, he was blacklisted as a threat to national security and barred from Russia. Mr. Browder maintains it is because he exposed corruption. In 2009, Browder's Russian lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was found dead in a Moscow jail. He'd been arrested on the same tax evasion charges he was accusing Russian officials of. His friend and client, Bill Browder, says Magnitsky was murdered by the authorities, but they say his death was a surprise to them. Bill Browder began a campaign that today has resulted in Magnitsky lying at the very heart of why Russia is accused of interfering in the US election. Following Magnitsky's death, Browder successfully lobbied the US Congress to use it as a catalyst to enact a range of sanctions targeting Russian individuals. The legislation is known as the Magnitsky Act. Critics allege the Russians are so determined to have these sanctions removed that they lobbied Trump's team to have them overturned before and after the US elections, something the Russians deny. The Russians accuse Browder of financial fraud and tax evasion, but it is his sanctions campaign that makes him so critical to the Trump-Russia scandal, which is currently being investigated in America by special counsel Robert Mueller. He was appointed last May to see whether there had been any Russian interference in the election or coordination between Donald Trump's campaign and the Russian government. Mueller has revealed that his team has indicted or had guilty pleas from 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian companies, and 4 former Trump advisors. These include Trump's former national security advisor, who was fired after discussing sanctions with the then Russian ambassador to the United States and then lying about it. Well, Bill Browder is with me now, and I'm wondering, Bill Browder, are you elated by the fact that Mueller has got these names in the frame, or are you depressed that it doesn't go close enough to the White House for your liking?
Well, I think we all have to take one step back, breathe carefully, and look at the situation. You have Robert Mueller, who's been appointed as special counsel. He's got 20 U.S. attorneys under him and 200 FBI agents under him. And they are slowly and methodically going through this Russia investigation using wiretaps, subpoenas, indictments, and everything in order to build a case. And we're sort of in this, in baseball language, in the 2nd inning out of 9 innings in this whole thing. So I don't think that we should either. I don't think we can draw any conclusions. One thing we can say for sure is that there are no leaks that come out of the Mueller investigation. And so everything that happens is a surprise for everybody. And I think we can all sit back, watch him do his job, and then either be satisfied that he's found collusion or be satisfied that there was no collusion.
So it's still impossible to say yet whether there was any collusion between any of the campaigns and the Russians.
So all we know so far is that the Russians hacked the, effectively sent out propaganda from their troll factory in St. Petersburg, and that's what the 13 people were indicted for. And we know for a fact that George Papadopoulos lied, that Manafort and Gates are being indicted for various things, and there's one other person, the son-in-law of a Russian oligarch, who lied to the FBI. That's all we know so far.
But before Mueller was even appointed, was your theory that conceivably, at least whatever happened with the Trump campaign, the Russians were very interested in trying to get into the American system to overturn the sanctions against them?
Yeah, so what we know 100% for sure, and I don't think there's any debate coming from the Russian side or the American side, is that that Vladimir Putin is particularly upset by Magnitsky sanctions, the sanctions named after my murdered lawyer. He was particularly upset by that. He sent in his own emissary, a woman lawyer named Natalia Veselnitskaya, who came to Trump Tower on June 9th, 2016, met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, and asked for one specific thing, which was to repeal the Magnitsky Act. We know for sure that that's what they wanted.
But do you think there is still a danger that the Magnitsky Act might actually be rolled back?
I don't think so. The Magnitsky Act is very firmly entrenched. It was passed by an act of Congress. So it wasn't the president's signature that made it happen. It was everybody in Congress voting for it to happen. And so to make it go away, you would need to have 51% of Congress to vote to allow Russian torturers and murderers to come back into America. I just don't see that politically possible.
But it looks very much as if you may be able to prove they were keen to do it, but not that in actual fact there was active connivance by the campaign.
We don't know, and that's what Robert Mueller, who's got 1,000 times the resources that I do, is there mandated to figure out. And so I know what the Russians wanted. We just don't know whether the Trump campaign cooperated or not on that request.
I mean, have you been quizzed by Mr. Mueller?
I can't actually go into details on conversations I've had with law enforcement.
But you can say whether you have or you haven't, as it were.
I cannot say that, but what I can say is that there is great interest in Washington at various levels, including I was invited to testify twice at Congress about this issue.
It's obviously going to be a long game. How long is the long game?
Well, the wheels of justice move much more slowly than the desires of people in politics, and I've seen how investigations go, and I would say that everybody is going to be frustrated and disappointed at the glacial pace at which this goes, and we should be happy at the glacial pace, because the one thing I can say for sure is that if there is an indictment, it's going to be done properly, and it's not going to be done stupidly. They're not going to go out on a limb. They're going to build up their evidence and build a case that's prosecutable.
Bill Browder, thank you very much for coming in, and we'll watch with great interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all my